Well, hello pen fans, Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and it is episode number 280 of Goulet Q&A. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about pen brand relationships, if broads are more troublesome than fine nibs, and where free ink actually comes from, among other things. It's been really unseasonably warm here in Virginia recently, so I've been getting outside with the kids. I've been riding my bike a little bit more. It's been great. I know it's just a tease because it's January, but I'm definitely enjoying the warmer, unseasonably warm weather while we're out here. Haven't really had any snow yet in Virginia, at least in central Virginia. Anyway, it's a crazy week for us here this week, just because we have vendor visits and lots of like year-end reporting now that our numbers are closed for the year. Any of you who are responsible for any type of financial reporting stuff in your companies, you know how much is involved there. And then from a leadership standpoint, looking at annual planning, because I don't know if you know this, but we don't just kind of meander along every year. We have goals, we have ambitions, we have projects, initiatives. Continuing to grow as we do as Goulet Pens does not happen by accident. So a lot of that work at the front end happens in January, and we are in the thick of that right now. We just live in spreadsheets. Like January is just spreadsheets all around. Charts and graphs and all kinds of fun, amazing things. So there's not a whole ton of stuff launching right now. A lot of manufacturers will come out with things for the holidays. Everybody's kind of tired after the holidays, and then stuff starts to pick up a little bit in February. So a little bit slower time for us around here in January from your perspective of things that we're launching, but believe me, we are still planning. There's a lot happening kind of behind the scenes that will keep your fountain pen life rather interesting. Some things that we have launched recently, we had the Mayora Imprante, which has come out. Mayora is the same company that makes Nettuno, and the Imprante is one of their new pens. It's nice. It's got like a nice matte and shiny kind of combo going on, some nice trim, Yovo nibs. So we've been enjoying getting to know those a little bit more because we knew they were coming for some time, and it just arrived. So we're getting to know it a little better. So we got that. Aurora has their pen called the Hastil. This is one of their, it's a rose gold, very thin pen. Kind of think of like a Lamy CP1 type of vibe. It's actually in the Museum of Modern Arts. I think it might be the only fountain pen in the Museum of Modern Arts in New York. So that's kind of cool. But anyway, so we have some of those. As part of their 100th anniversary, they did the rose gold one. We also have an anniversary edition Aurora Talentum and the Edison Collier Rock Candy, a new color that came out this week. So that's kind of fun. And then we have, notions that the TWSBI Eco in white and rose gold is going to be coming in the wings. We're still waiting. It's not going to be here this week, but soonish. And then I just want to give you a little bit of a heads up. Next Thursday, January 23rd, is National Handwriting Day. Not sure if you knew that was a thing. So we can all just enjoy writing with our pens and sharing about them, in person or on social. Maybe mail somebody a letter. Just write a note. Just put a little pen time on your calendar for National Handwriting Day. So that's kind of fun. All right, there we go. Let's get into the questions. I have 8 questions for you this week. I'm being a little ambitious. We'll see how it goes, but I got some good questions. So pen and writing questions is starting out with Ella Drawing on Instagram. Are broad nibs more prone to having issues than fine nibs? This is a great question. Obviously, I've written with a lot of different pens. Not only do I have experience hands-on with pens, but I also know very, realistically, how many we end up seeing trouble with because, we're not the manufacturer, so we don't necessarily handle like warranty repair issues per se, but a lot of times we're the first point of contact for anybody that's having issues, or specifically if it's within our return window, we will be the first ones to kind of understand when anybody's having any potential challenges with said pen or ink or whatever. And, we look at different numbers and different stats and things like that. So I don't have any like hard numbers to share like across the board fines versus broads. That data is complicated to pull. But what I can say is just kind of from years of being in the business and my own experience, I would not say that broad nibs are more prone to having issues. It's more prone to certain issues than fine nibs. So I'm gonna just break that down a little bit for you about why each might have some issues. But as a general statement, I would say no. They don't have more problems than fine nibs. So for one, fine nibs usually have more of an issue If they have an issue, it might be with flow, like flow keeping up. Partly because, you know, usually they're adjusted so the flow is not quite as generous, because when you're writing fine, you just don't need to put as much ink down. And you're trying to maybe write on a paper that's slightly more absorbent. You don't want to put as much ink down, maybe because then it spreads and your handwriting can look really blobby and not as defined. So they intentionally designed those pens to not put as much ink down, and just naturally the capillary action, if you have less surface area on the very tipping of the nib that's actually touching the paper, it's not going to draw the ink through as quickly on a fine nib as it would for a broad. It just kind of works that way across the board, across all brands. Of course, you can open up the tines, you can spread those out, you can increase the flow or decrease the flow on any pen. I mean, theoretically, maybe not you, you know, in theory, a human could, but it is possible to do that. But in generally speaking, just the natural kind of physics of the way it works, fine nibs are going to put a little less ink down than broad nibs. And the reason that can cause some flow issues is if you maybe have some, you know, dust and paper fibers and stuff like that just after using the pen for a long time, and you maybe haven't cleaned it out, or, you know, it's kind of sitting out for a while, it kind of dries out. It's just because there's a little less ink flowing through it, it's a little more prone to having some, like, you know, hard flow issues because of like blockage and stuff like that. So they need to be cleaned, maybe just a little bit more. They're not quite as accommodating there. And then if you're using any type of like shimmering ink or ink with a high sheen or anything like that, it's just less stuff is flowing through, so it's going to be a little more restricted. You know, it's just like if you have a garden hose versus if you have a fire hose. You know, it's easier to constrict a garden hose than it is a fire hose. You know, it's easier to stop that just by pinching it. So it's kind of a similar concept, sort of, with a fountain pen. So generally, if you're going to have flow issues, it might happen a little more with a fine nib, with some of those particular issues. You have different flow issues with the broad, and I'll get to that in a second. It can also feel scratchy, like you just have less surface area, less area of the tip of the nib on a fine nib that's actually touching the paper. So it's a little more sensitive to being out of alignment. Just naturally, you're gonna feel, you know, more of the bumps in the road, so to speak, if you have less surface area there. You know, it's sort of like if you're, you know, on roller skates versus driving a car. Now, maybe that's not the best analogy, but, you know, obviously, like, the wheels are smaller, there's less there to kind of absorb whatever you might feel, so just, they can be a little more sensitive in that way. So that you'll usually deal with the scratchiness and feedback issues on a fine much more than a broad. Yeah. And then let's see here, what else? Yeah. I think that covered it. Broad nibs, so yes, usually wetter, usually feel smoother, just kind of across the board. It's part of why people like broads. But usually the problem, and this is pretty much the one most universal problem that we see here with broad nibs, not with all broads, but the number one problem we see with them is usually what's called baby's bottom. And that is kind of a consequence of the way that the nibs are smoothed, the way they're ground. This is a little more prominent on gold nibs actually than steel. And essentially what this is the result of it is going to be you're going to have maybe some starting issues where you'll do like half a stroke and then it'll start to write. So that's called starting. And then you might have skipping, where if you're in the middle of writing words, or you maybe dot an I or something like that, it won't dot. So the reason that's happening is because if you look at the tip of the nib, right, so it's round, if you're looking straight at the tip of the nib, there's going to be a slit down the middle. Well, it's not a perfectly round circle, right, because there needs to be just a little bit of an opening here, because if you think about it, when they cut the initial grind, and I'm trying to do this with my hands, it's a little awkward, but, you know, when they cut the initial slit, right, down the middle of that tip and all the way down into the nib, you are going to end up with a very, very sharp edge here at the bottom. It's going to feel very scratchy. So they have to smooth that out a little bit. And the way that you do that work by hand, there's different manufacturers can do it different ways. But essentially the way that you do it, like if a nibmeister was doing it, is they're going to lift one of the tines and they're going to take a very, very fine, you know, micro mesh or sandpaper, some sort of abrasive, and they're going to just round over that inside bottom piece of the tip of that nib. And I mean, we're talking like, this is like fractions of a millimeter here. It's like such a small amount, you really visually can't even see it. But you got to take off that edge. Otherwise, when you are writing with the nib, you know, this is the nib, moving along, writing on the edge of the page, if there's any amount of pressure or any rotation of the pen, that edge is going to catch, right? So you have to smooth that edge over a little bit, or it's going to be really, really feedbacky. And the tolerances there are incredibly narrow. So you can get variances, even when you're doing, you know, a trained professional doing this a lot, there can be some variances. So you gotta take it a little bit at a time and do it. What happens if you end up smoothing that over too much, that's when you end up with this effect where that inside part of the slit of the tip of the nib ends up having a really big gap right there. That's what's referred to as baby's bottom, because again, it's round and it has, you know, a crack of sorts, right? And it's too big of a gap there where the paper meets the bottom of that nib, where that has been smoothed over like that. And the capillary action can break. The ink actually kind of sits up off the paper a little bit, and it's not until you press down a little bit, and when you press down, it increases the flex, the spread of the tines a little bit, which forces more ink down through. Then the ink makes contact with the paper and it starts writing. So really the way to fix baby's bottom is you gotta smooth out, you gotta basically smooth out the cheeks of the baby's bottom. I didn't come up with this term. This is what's known in the industry, but hey, for better or for worse. So you gotta smooth out the cheeks so that you can get, you know, kind of back to a normal level of a gap there. It's gotta be a little bit of a gap, but not too much. It's very fine tolerances. It's very hard work to get that done. This tends to happen more on broad nibs for whatever reason. And it happens more on gold nibs because, you know, if you are in a production setting and you're trying to crank these nibs out, which, you know, can happen with you know, mass-produced pens, what happens is the gold can actually flex a little bit as you're putting it to whatever type of smoothing apparatus you might be working on. And when that flexes out, that can actually smooth over that inside edge just a little too much. It writes really smooth and it writes great, and especially if you're dip testing it or writing it with a fresh inked pen, the amount of ink that's in there is going to be heavier than it would be when it's kind of worked its way through the initial inking and you're just working more drawing ink from the reservoir. That takes a lot of time. Like if you think about it in a production setting, to go through that whole process, write with it enough to where you're actually getting the flow through the nib. There's ways to compensate for that, and some manufacturers have figured that out maybe a little better than others. And it depends on individual writing style and writing pressure. There's a lot of variables here, but even still, the end result that we see is that there's more of an issue with this baby's bottom on broader nibs. Because again, there's more surface area to go, so that there's further up for the crack to be able to hide that ink and not have that happen. On a fine nib, you're just not going to have as big of a kind of a divot there. So that's what ends up happening with broad nibs more than fine nibs. But other than that, pretty much most of the other issues happen actually more with fine nibs than broad nibs. So again, they try to go super smooth because you think about it from a manufacturer standpoint, if there's wiggle room and tolerances, you'd rather err a little bit on the side of being too smooth, perhaps flirting with baby's bottom, than flirting with the nib feeling scratchy, because the tolerance for people with nibs feeling scratchy is like 0. Unless feedback is one thing, but actual scratchiness, it feels terrible. And it's immediately like, nope, not what I wanted a fountain pen for, send it back immediately. So they err a little bit, maybe a little bit on the side of, let's maybe over smooth it, over polish it. Especially I find with like European nibs, European broad nibs can happen a little bit more. We don't see that a lot on the Jowo, especially on the Jowo steels. They tend to be okay, but it really can vary by manufacturer. So, and again, it's also difficult too because broad nibs are not as common. Like we sell kind of across the board. It's not exactly fair numbers to pull because not every pen has a broad nib, but it's probably, you know, maybe 5 to 8% of the nibs we sell are broads, whereas you're into like the 20s, you know, pushing upward of 30% maybe on a fine nib. So it's like fine nibs far outsell broad nibs. So there's just not as many of them. So, you know, if there's people that are having issues with broad nibs, you know, you might, the word might, well, I don't know. If there's more fine nibs, and people might hear about it more. I don't know. It depends. So there's some kind of factor there. I don't know the psychology behind that, but I think usually what happens, what we notice is it's not new fountain pen users that are getting broad nibs. It's people that are pretty discerning. They generally know what it is that they want, and they know how pens should flow. So if there is an issue with a broad nib, then they are going to be able to self-diagnose that pretty quickly and speak up about that. Whereas somebody with a fine nib, maybe they don't know how it should write, or they don't know what's normal or what's not if they're newer to the pen hobby. Generally speaking, people who are new to the pen hobby are not buying broad nibs. Just that's a super general statement. I don't have any like data on how long people have been using pens, you know, for our customers, but that's just my sense from kind of being in the industry and qualitatively just talking to a lot of pen people. So there you go. So that's kind of my assessment of the whole broad versus fine thing. But keep in mind, it's not like this is a major problem for, you know, all broads or all fines or anything. This is just of the nibs that have problems. This is generally what we see. Vast majority of them are great, and you will not have any problems with them. But if you do have problems, maybe now you're just a little more educated on maybe why. You can talk to us, talk to our team. We'll help kind of diagnose, and you are empowered. Cool. All right. Next question I have is from Tank Cruisin' on Twitter. What's a good sub $100 everyday carry pen for people who ink a pen up, write with it a bit, then throw it in their work bag and forget that they own that pen until they need it 3 to 9 weeks later? I know about Platinum and TWSBI, but are there any that use standard international cartridges? Great question. Have not been asked this one specifically before, so I always like to be challenged in my own brain a little bit. I'm going to be completely honest with you. The whole throw it in a bag and forget about it for upwards of 9 weeks, not really where fountain pens shine, right? Like you're kind of maybe pushing the practical and maybe highest and best use of what a fountain pen is at that point. Like that's really why ballpoints and roller balls were invented, was for that convenience. And you know what, it's not going to be the best writing experience, but it's going to be there after sitting out for a long time. It's going to be able to kind of be a knock around pen. Fountain pens in general, just the nature of them, the type of ink they use, they are more of kind of a fine writing instrument. They're going to have a limit, generally speaking, on how much abuse they can take, and how much, for lack of a better term, neglect. I know these are harsh words, and I'm not trying to judge you. You be practical. You got to live your life. You don't dictate how your whole life around a pen. I'm practical about that. Some people do. I certainly do more than that than probably most, but not practical for everybody, and it's not required. Like there are different tools for different reasons. I would say get a Pilot G2 or get a reliable roller ball that writes well enough for you need to use it once every 3 to 9 weeks. That's not really going to be the best use for a fountain pen. I mean, I'm going to go deeper into it and give you some maybe options for that to happen, but I'll go ahead and put it out there that like you're not going to have like a one perfect pen that's going to be the best for that, probably. So that's what I'll just kind of lay the groundwork for this question. Fountain pens are a little more maintenance. They have this liquid ink that can evaporate. So you're going to need a pen that is going to have a really, really good sealing cap. You already mentioned Platinum and TWSBI. This is two areas where they really shine. They're also very affordable. So these are two that I can very easily recommend. Eco 580, VAC Mini, the VAC 700R. Basically any of TWSBI's offering is going to be really strong in this way. It's going to have a high ink capacity. It's going to be a good knockaround pen. Platinum 2, the Preppy, Profante, the Procyon, all those are going to be really good. Procyon especially, because it's got that slip and seal cap like you would have on the Platinum 3776 Century, but that pushes your $100 budget. So if you stick with the Profante, I think that would be pretty good. They'll do some of the best for the job. Your mileage is going to vary like anything depending on your environment and your situation, what ink you use, all that stuff. But some other contenders that could work, possibly, we wanted Standard International, so I pulled some of what I thought would be the best. I am not confident that any of these Standard International ones will be like, the vast majority, like 100% guaranteed when you pick it up in 3 to 9 weeks, it's going to write at the first dip, at the first point. Probably any of these might be challenged by that, but I'll give you ones that I think will be the best contenders. One would be, most of the QOTW offerings. So you start with like a classic sport or ice sport or any of the sports, frosted sport. There's a lot of different colors of them, but basically the sport model, it takes the short international cartridges. You can also eyedropper convert them. I would not recommend that if you're just going to be tossing it and leaving it forever, because that potentially could leak on you and stuff like that. You want to be maybe just a little more attentive to an eyedropper conversion if you're going to do that, but it's a possibility. I mean, what the heck? You got to live your life, right? So possible one. So you're in like the $20, $25 range there. The QOTW per KO could be another option. You can use slightly longer cartridges here. I can't remember. I know they take a converter, a standard converter. Can't remember if they take an international long cartridge. Not that there's a ton of options there anyway, but could also be an option for you aside from the sport, but it's a very similar kind of pen. Another one that could possibly work, the Monteverde Monza. Relatively affordable pen. The durability may not be quite as strong as maybe the QOTW's, but it is standard international, and I would not eyedropper convert this one and leave it in the bag either, because it's got this little end that actually can be removed. You would need to like glue it in place if you're going to eyedropper convert it, so I wouldn't recommend doing that for such a throw around, knock around pen. It's something that you may want to just have a little more attention to if you were going to do that, but you could certainly throw some standard international cartridges in here. There is, a nib kind of insert seal around here, so you've got a pretty fighting chance at having something relatively reliable over time, though I have not tested that for myself with that pen. You got some options with Jinhao for sure. I don't know how well all of these are going to seal up over that amount of time. The one that I think would probably give you the best bet would be the Jinhao 51A. This is kind of like a Parker 51 inspired by pen. So this is going to be standard international. It's going to be a hooded nib, which means that there's not as much of the nib and feed kind of exposed. It's going to decrease the rate of evaporation that you might have with a standard pen. Also, the cap seals pretty decently. It's got a little insert in here. You got a fighting chance. And it's a relatively inexpensive pen. You're looking like, $10, $15, $20, depending on the style you go with. So very affordable. You can, clean them relatively easily as well. And then the last one I have here is a Diplomat Magnum. Diplomat Magnum, also standard international as well. Great starter pen. The nib experience is really good. It's got a bouncier nib. All these are steel nib pens because there's nothing in the sub $100 range that's going to get you where you need to go on this question. Very affordable. It's plastic. It's light. Good toss around in your bag kind of thing. How well it'll seal over that period of time would be my question. It does look like it has an insert in here. I just don't know how well specifically it'll hold up over so many weeks without any use whatsoever. So, but still it's worth it. It's like just over 20 bucks. Certainly something worth considering. Another one that could possibly work, there's, Diplomat has some other options like the Traveler, the Esteem. They're going to be metal pens, a little more durable maybe in a tossing bag situation than the Magnum might be. So that could be an option for you. The Traveler's pen company has one called the Brass pen. I don't have it with me because I have it at home, but very, very durable pen. Again, the longevity, is it going to work weeks and weeks and weeks of sitting there? Not sure. I've used mine where I've been carrying it around on my person, kind of using it. I haven't carried it around for like 9 weeks without using it, because that's just not, if you're carrying around a pen with you for 9 weeks and not using it in your pocket, you probably should change up your pen because you're just not using it. It's not really doing its job. So anyway, but still, that one might have a fighting chance. Maybe a Conklin Durograph. That one, it might be too nice of a pen to just really toss around, but it certainly fits in that price range. I don't know how well it's going to seal up for that long of a time, but it's certainly a nice pen, very professional looking, lots of color options and stuff. So I'll throw that one in as a hard maybe. So anyway, I would maybe lean you towards some of the metal bodied pens maybe, or metal components, just because they're going to be a little more durable in that situation. But either way, I really do think like some of the Platinum and TWSBI options, like you mentioned at first, will be some of your best options. But now you at least have some other ones there to go off of, should you be in such a situation. All right, so got a couple ink questions. This is from Drainer A on Instagram. If you could bring back 3 limited edition inks, which ones would you choose and why? Okay, so I will just preface this a little bit by saying, well, I didn't choose 3, I chose 5, but that's because I don't like making firm choices. No, actually, I've just said I started with 3 and then I added 2 more. So just deal with it. Limited edition inks. Okay, so a little bit different. The terminology is a little bit different than pens. Pens, generally speaking, limited edition means they only made a certain number. They are usually individually numbered on the pen itself. If not, it has like a plaque or a card or something on the packaging that has a number with it. That is generally speaking what limited edition means. With ink, it's very seldom individually numbered, like bottles of ink. It's very seldom limited to a certain numbered batch. Some manufacturers do that, but that's not necessary. I mean, that would severely limit my options in answering this question. So I gave myself a little more liberty when answering this one than that. So just a little bit of distinction there, difference between some limited edition, what it means with pens and inks. With inks, I pretty much took it to mean special edition, like you would have in the pen world. Like it's a special run. I generally don't know how many bottles of a given ink of anything are actually being made. That's something that's kept rather mysterious. Probably because most of them don't even actually know the hard number, because it's usually done in batches and the bottling happens later, and maybe they keep track of it, maybe not. Who knows? But they don't really share that publicly with even retailers. I know how many I usually get, but that doesn't really mean much. So I have some that I know are basically inks that you can no longer get. That's pretty much how I interpreted this, so just caveat that. My first one, pretty obviously, if you could guess, would be Lamy Dark Lilac. I've talked about this a lot. I did keep a bottle for myself. Here's the packaging. It's a conventional Lamy bottle. If you wanted to get a kind of a modern replacement for it, you can get the Lamy Crystal Azurite. It's very, very close. But I do have the Dark Lilac, and I swabbed all these up. I'll show these to you once I go through all the colors. The next one I have, that was a special edition Lamy that matched the Dark Lilac Safari from 2016. All right, the next one is Pelikan Edelstein Tourmaline. So this was the ink of the year from 2012. So it's going back a little bit. Most of my inks are going to be ones that I have perspective on, that I've seen and experienced in my time in the pen world, though I do have a couple that are throwbacks. Okay, Edelstein Tourmaline. I put this one here for Rachel, really. This is one of her all-time favorite colors. It's a nice pink color. She uses it quite often. She actually hoarded a couple bottles before they went. So she's well stocked on it, but I put it on here just because I love my wife, and it's an homage to her. Plus, it's a good color. Next one I kind of debated about this one, was Parker Penman Sapphire. So when I started out 10 years ago in the pen business, there was a lot of, talk about, noodlers and diamine and private reserve. There were, some kind of aspiring colors to be had, but the one that people would not shut up about was Parker Penman Sapphire. It was not a super popular ink when it was around in the 90s, and it's a different formulation of ink. It cleaned differently. It's like a solvent-based ink, or I guess maybe an alcohol-based ink that cleans with a solvent. I don't know all the chemistry behind it. It was made in the UK. It was available really only for a few years, but it has a very deep blue color with a heavy red sheen. So it essentially was alluding to some of the really popular heavy sheening ink colors that you see now from brands like Organic Studios with nitrogen, and others like Diamine has their Majestic Blue, Noodler's has Autumn and Azure. There are a number of these blue with heavy red sheen ink colors, but at the time there was really nothing else like it, and when it was discontinued, it achieved a sort of mythical status, as things sometimes do, a cult following, if you will. And it was almost like if anyone could find a Parker pen. I mean, to try to find a bottle of that now, you might pay like $200. It's insane. It's a nice color. I really like the color. And it would be kind of interesting to bring back for historical reasons, but I doubt they will. So I debated about including this one on my top 3, just because there are so many good modern alternatives that aren't like as problematic to clean. It's like not compatible with other inks, so you'd have to like completely clean out your pen very thoroughly before you'd use another ink in it. That's why they discontinued it, is because it was kind of troublesome. Even though the Parker Penman line was gorgeous, like they had a green, they had a number of other colors, 4 or 5 colors total, I think. Just gorgeous. but it came with a price of maintenance and stuff like that. So anyway, that one I put on there because I do love that shade of color. And for historical reasons, I just wanted to give a nod to myself 10 years ago of having that Parker Pen Sapphire. And I'll show you all these in a second. I'm just teasing you with not showing you the actual swabs, but I did swab them all. The next one that I have that would compete probably with Sapphire for me is Lamy Copper Orange. Now this is an ink that is really not well known, not very popular. This was the special edition ink from 2015 that matched the All-Star of the same name. We at the time received, I think our initial shipment was like just a couple dozen or something like that. And then we were told, yeah, this is going to be regularly available. We got like one follow-up shipment that was probably of similar size. And then it was discontinued. Like it was after it had all sold through. They said, actually, we're not making any more. That's it. And we were like, ugh! But it's a great orange color. I do love it, but it's gone. And then there's also good alternatives for oranges, but that one in particular was just kind of like, man, the world never really got to see what this color is. The last one I had was, again, kind of another blue that is really unique and special, and definitely I don't think will be made anymore. Well, it still is made. This is Noodler's Blue Upon the Plains of Abraham. This is a Canadian exclusive ink, so this isn't even something we can get. Nathan does still have it, but there's some component or something to it that made it really amazing that he's not able to get anymore. I think the component was discontinued or something like that. And so the original formulation of Blue Upon the Plains of Abraham, which is what I have here, it's a little cloggy. It's a very thick ink, but it looks really, really cool on paper. And you can't get that original formulation anymore. Don't even try. It's been probably at least 10 years since it's been available. So I don't know that for a fact because I never had it, but there you go. So I swabbed up all of the 5 colors that I just mentioned here, and I can kind of show you what they look like. So dark lilac here, nice deep purple color, had some okay shading. Again, very similar to what you're going to see with crystal azurite, and the crystal azurite you're actually going to get a little bit of a sheen with it as well, maybe even more so than dark lilac, so it's a little different, but pretty darn close. Still, this pen, this ink, very, very popular. It's like legendary status almost with Lamy. Here's tourmaline. Nothing crazy on the properties, just a nice pink color. Rachel really likes the way that it flowed in her pen. She still uses it on the regular, and she will often use the Pilot Yamabudo as well, which is a little deeper, like magenta color. But anyway, here's Penman Sapphire. You can see some of that heavy sheen when I tilt the the pad up into the light there, but it's a deep blue with kind of a red sheen. Actually, I think, just from my own memory, the Organic Studio Nitrogen is even going to sheen heavier than this one will. Still a troublesome ink. You're not going to get that heavy of a sheen without some hassle, but it's kind of worth it. Lamy Copper Orange, nice color. Diamine Pumpkin will get you close. There's some other oranges that are also kind of close, but I did like this one and it matched the pen pretty well. And then last one is Blue Upon the Plains of Abraham. This one, I'll try to show you close up if I can. Whoops, touching the mic. So very, very deep blue when you dump it on really thick. And then it has this like beautiful, like almost like a pink halo around the blue. It looks really cool when you actually write with it, especially if you have the right paper. Again, very high maintenance ink. You can't get any more, but really interesting. So that'd be neat to bring back. So that's my top 3 choices. The truth is I have like a lot of bottles over there of discontinued stuff, and I just like to have the opportunity to pull them out. So that's what I did today. So thank you for humoring me on that one and giving me the liberty to answer 5 of them. All right, let's see here. Felicia Fancy Bottom on Instagram, great handle by the way. Do ink cartridges tend to dry out faster than converters? Okay, so I'm assuming you're not obviously having a converter stand alone with ink in it, not in a pen, because if that was the case, for sure it would dry out faster than a sealed cartridge would. I'm thinking more if you're actually using it in the pen, is the pen's ability to hold ink and not dry out going to be impacted at all by the filling mechanism, specifically between a cartridge and a converter? And I can pretty generally answer this, like from a functional standpoint, no, not really. because basically where the ink is going to dry out of the pen is more from the nib and the feed. It's not really happening like in the back there. You know, if you have a really, really well sealed, like the Platinum with their slip and seal, they tout that it will keep your nib wet for 2 years, and I've seen some of that. I've seen TWSBIs hold up really well too, but is that going to hold up? But then, like the other end, because basically you have your ink reservoir, you have your feed mechanism, and then you have the nib itself. So if you have the nib completely perfectly sealed up, and that's not going to dry out there, would the filling mechanism start to maybe fail and dry out the ink somehow? Generally not. It's pretty well sealed up, so that's almost never going to be the point of failure or the point of evaporation for the water that's in your ink. It's usually going to be up near in the cap with the nib and the feed and all that, because it's way more open, it's way more exposed. You know, the ink is meant to flow out of there. It's meant to flow in, it's meant to flow out of that end of the pen. It's really supposed to be perfectly well sealed at the other end of the pen where the filling mechanism is, whatever the filling mechanism is. So as long as it's properly installed, properly sealed, it's going to be pretty much a wash. Now I will say the plastic that's used, generally speaking, for cartridges versus converters is a little bit different. The cartridge plastic, I don't know for sure what the exact type of plastic is, but it seems to me to be a little softer plastic, more like a HDPE, like a milk jug type of plastic. It's a little softer. You're going to have a little bit more kind of leaching, maybe a little bit of evaporation, moisture evaporation coming through that plastic over an extended period of time. So I've seen it where you have disposable cartridges that are in that like softer plastic that are maybe a couple of years old. You know, they usually don't stamp dates on these cartridges, but I've seen some that have been quite old where it's like half the stuff is evaporated out of there. And it's really just the water that's evaporated. You can actually reconstitute that. If you put distilled water in and you fill that cartridge back up, it'll basically be like the ink originally was. So you won't have the convenience of just popping in and write with it. It's going to be really cloggy. It's going to be really dry. And it's not going to flow very well. Super saturated because the water is, you know, it literally is like concentrated ink. You can reconstitute it though. Does that happen in a converter? Well, no. A converter isn't holding ink on its own unless it's installed in a pen. So it's not really like a one-for-one kind of thing. But converter plastic is usually a little different type of plastic. It's a little harder, a little thicker, a little more impermeable. So I guess if you, in a controlled setting, just tested between the two, a converter would dry out before, a cartridge would dry out before a converter. But you're not going to be in a real world scenario where that's going to be the point of failure. It's going to be at the nib end. So pretty much just maintain your pens well, keep them flowing, keep the ink going, and it'll basically never be an issue. And then just in general, use whatever filling mechanism meets your needs. Don't really be concerned about that impacting your flow. It's going to be other things that impact your flow, like your pen maintenance routine, the type of ink that you choose, your environment, just like how dry your environment is and how well your cap seals, these types of things. That matters way more than a cartridge versus a converter. All right, some business questions. I got 4 of them. I just really got excited about business questions this week, I guess. One is the batrachotoxin on YouTube. Hope I said that right. I've been a customer since 2016, and I tried to make an order last week. Alas, you don't deliver to Brazil anymore. Why is that? I mean, we all know that our taxes are abusive and our customs are horrible, but we all know that if we ordered from abroad, you should expect to pay and wait. I felt sad about it. Can you explain why? And if it is the custom stuff, you should resume the ordering and put up a big disclaimer that you can accept returns for our sad. You can't accept returns for our sad customs. All right, I'm glad you asked this. I wanted to nuance this a little bit. This is a change we've had to make recently. Every single country has different rules. You know, when you're shipping internationally, it's amazingly more complicated than you would believe. Every country has different rules. They constantly change. They don't always change with notice, so it can get rather complicated. This one changed with a little bit of notice, at least. So we have just had challenges shipping to Brazil basically since our founding. It's been It's been very tough. Like you said, it does not seem like the Brazilian government wants anyone to be shipping things into Brazil because they pretty much put barriers up at every turn, more so than most other countries. I can say that somewhat objectively. There's high customs fees. I've heard of pretty much 100% being kind of the standard, though it may vary a little bit here and there. So yeah, just think like whatever pen you buy, if you buy a $200 pen, you're paying $200 in customs fees. It's kind of crazy. Has pretty unreliable tracking. The delivery times are all over the map. Some people like yourself understand that. A lot of other people don't, so they get very confused and frustrated, and it's a customer service nightmare experience because we can't tell them where the package is, why it's held up, or anything because we get no information back. It just disappears into the void. And it might, I'm not joking, we have had packages go into Brazilian customs and arrive back to us a year and 7 months later as a return to sender. And with no reason or explanation why. Just like regular pen, ball link, nothing crazy. You know, it's extremely unpredictable and unreliable. So that's frustrating from a customer service standpoint. We've had lots of return to senders for no reason. We've had damaged stuff with no explanation, loss in trains. I mean, you all know how we pack. It's pretty insane, but still damage, loss in transit, stuff that you can't really know for sure, but you speculate was probably stolen. And that gets just really, really frustrating. When that happens in a certain regularity and percentage, it's like, oh gosh, this is really frustrating. So we were doing it, we were still offering it, but there was one straw recently that kind of broke the camel's back, specifically with Brazil. So, you know, they have, I guess, a new Brazilian regulation requiring us to attain your CPF, which is basically like the equivalent of a tax ID number, like a social security number for Brazil. And it's obviously a very personally identifiable number. They're requiring us to attain that from you, securely store it, remit it with the orders that we send out. We don't have a good system to be able to do that. Puts an incredible amount of liability on our part to be able to do that. Add that on top of all the other challenges that we had. Actually, FedEx already required that we do that. I don't know if they were just being proactive, if they were under some different regulation because of the shipping, you know, type that they do. So we already weren't able to ship FedEx into Brazil. We had to use U.S. mail, and you know, for not to get too nitty-gritty into it, but in order to have our prices be as affordable as possible, we use a shipping consolidator for international packages as one option that we offer. And the shipping consolidator that was the only one we were able to use into Brazil now has to go under the same CPF kind of collection. So there's now no option for us but to collect this basically personally identifiable number. And the liability on that for us is too great. Combine it with everything else. It sucks for you as a customer because it's not your fault. It's literally you're not doing anything wrong. It's just the barriers that we have to be able to ship into your country have now become too great. So we had to make that call, and it really stinks. The only thing that I can think that maybe would be a workaround, I know that some of our international customers, for a variety of whatever reasons, will actually use like their own shipping consolidator, or they'll have you know, a place that they can set up with. A lot of times they're located in Florida or California or wherever, it depends where it's going, that are meant to be basically forwarding services to international countries. They're more set up for that. They're doing that higher volume. They probably have worked out arrangements where they can securely handle this information. They do this every day. We don't do this every day. We're really a pretty small company. For us to try to keep tabs and regulations and adhere to all of these different countries is sometimes just too much. So we have to make that call as to when is it too much of a burden for us to manage the overhead, the logistics of that, and the risk of that with personally identifiable information. So Brazil crossed that barrier for us. We have other countries that have been in that situation too. But we try to ship everywhere we possibly can. But for those situations, that would be my recommendation, is to look into. I don't have an affiliation set up with any specific forwarding service. I don't have any to recommend, unfortunately. But that would be my advice to you if you're in Brazil or any other country where this is an issue. Look into some forwarding services that you know people use in your local area, and consider those, because then they will have a US-based location. We can ship to them. We can ship to your forwarding service with a US location, and then from that point, they are then taking on the challenge of getting stuff into your country. So that's the best I can offer you. Unfortunately, we're just not of the size where we can do all these workarounds for every single country. It sucks. It sucks, and I hate to have to be in this position, but at least I wanted to explain why we're there. I'm super, super sorry, but this is just the logistics in the world we live in. So thank you for your loyalty since 2016. I super appreciate it. All right, kind of a bummer, but moving on. Journal Times Imagination on Instagram asked, how are you guys able to give away free bottles of ink with some purchases? Well, it's relatively simple. There's really no such thing as free ink, right? As the economic adage says, like, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Somebody's paying for it somewhere along the way. I just researched because I took economics classes in college and stuff like that. So pretty much the only thing I remember from microeconomics was no such thing as a free lunch and supply and demand. I don't remember most of the other concepts, but those ones stuck with me. But I just researched a little bit. Where does the original saying of no such thing as a free lunch come from? It was actually from the turn of the 20th century in America, where bars and saloons would offer free lunches with the purchase of a drink, an alcoholic beverage. Of course, the food that they would sell would be extremely salty. You ever wonder why you have free peanuts at bars and pretzels and things like that? It's because these high, salty, dry, carb-loaded foods make you thirsty. So that's originally where the phrase came from. There was a big, I guess, kind of a trend of, especially you think like in the West where there were, prospectors and gold rush and all that type of stuff. People didn't have a lot of money for food, so they'd go in to get these free lunches with their drinks. Of course, they would end up paying for it with alcohol. So that's where the expression kind of came about. We don't really know who originally coined the phrase. It was kind of made popular by Milton Friedman and some others. But anyway, that's originally where the concept comes from. So, okay, yes, when it's taken like kind of to the extreme, it becomes almost like a bait and switch kind of mentality where it's like, yeah, I'll give you a free lunch, but then I'll, give you tons of salty things and you'll end up buying more drinks and I will cover the cost of the lunch. That's originally where the concept came from. That's not really our situation. That's not really what we're trying to do with the ink, but the concept is still there. It's like the ink isn't just magically free. Somebody's paying for that ink. So I'll nuance a little bit, maybe where some of that comes from and really contextualize this concept here at Goulet. I can't speak for every retailer, but at least kind of where we come from with this type of stuff and where we end up doing, I'll call it gift with purchases. It could be ink, it could be a pen case, it could be any number of things, but free thing with a thing, right? Us, strategically, we never historically have increased the price of a product to give something for free as a strategy. Other companies definitely do. I'm not speaking specifically pen companies because I don't really know. It seems like most of the, especially pens that are out there in the pen world, are pretty level playing field. You can look on the internet and you can see what everybody's charging for pens. If you look and you see somebody's giving a pen with a free ink, but that pen costs $15 more than everybody else, well, that's not really free ink. You're just raising the price of it, So you can tell, you're pretty savvy. You can tell when people are doing that. But if you're literally like, this pen across the board is, I'll just say $100 because it's easy, but one retailer has a free bottle of ink and another one doesn't, well, for you, yes, that is free ink. But there is a cost to that ink. I'll nuance why we, as a retailer, might be willing to pay for that ink that you get for free. What situations we would do that. Obviously, if we did that all day long, every day, everywhere, we would be making less money, not having a healthy company, not being able to invest in new products and things like that. Wouldn't really be the smartest strategy, So as a across the board kind of thing, that goes for shipping, that goes for ink, that goes for everything. It all has to come from somewhere, right? The math has to work out. So for us, going back to your question, free ink. Sometimes it's just us straight up eating the cost. We are willing to take lower margins because of a couple different situations. It might be because, we bought a bunch of inventory of a certain pen or another product. It's just sitting there on the shelf. It's not selling as well. We've tried to promote it. We've tried to do a number of educate people. It's just, for whatever reason, it's just fallen flat. We have too many of them. We might do a projection out and say, like, it's going to take us 3.5 years to sell all these pens at this rate. We really don't want these pens to sit there for 3.5 years. We would rather take a hit on profitability on our part. I'm speaking very much from a business standpoint here. I'd rather take a hit on profitability so that I can recoup that cash. Because as you know, if you're in an inventory-based business, when you look at your shelves and you have stuff that's not moving, that is literally just cash sitting on the shelf. It's not doing any good for anybody if those products are not something that customers are desiring and it's not moving through. It's literally you're your own bank at that point, except you have no return on your investment. So if the stuff's not selling, so we keep tabs on things like turn rate, and we have targets for that type of stuff. How many days we turn over our entire warehouse worth of inventory, and it varies by product, of course, but as an average. So we keep track of that stuff, and we have goals. And if something is just not moving along, we will assist it, and we will just take that hit ourselves. We don't. If it's a gift with purchase, generally speaking, we have a little more liberty as a retailer to do that. There is something called minimum advertised pricing, MAP pricing, that's pretty common in the retailing world, that says, okay, you may have heard of the term MSRP, the manufacturer's suggested retail price. Sometimes the suggested retail price and the minimum advertised price are the same. This happens a lot with like premium products and things like that. A lot of times there might be brands that are maybe want to be excluded from any type of promotion or any type of discounting whatsoever. This is why sometimes when you see like, I think of specifically just Bed Bath & Beyond, right? Like they do 20% off coupons all day long, right? Or Macy's one-day sale, or Haynes Furniture, biggest sale ever this Saturday. Well, what about the biggest sale ever last Saturday? Whatever. That's a strategy sometimes. But you'll often see in the fine print some brands excluded. I'm thinking specifically Bed Bath & Beyond. You might have Dyson is excluded. You might have, whatever, All Clad, pots and pans. You might have some very, very premium brands that are excluded from those coupons because they have rules in place about what a retailer can publicly advertise, a price sign for. Now, there's laws in place that a manufacturer cannot dictate what price something actually sells for. That would be price fixing, and there have been laws and stuff passed because back in like the early 1900s there were monopolies and price fixing and all kinds of crazy stuff that happened with the big companies. So there's some laws in place to protect the free market, but still there are things that if you have an agreement as a retailer with a manufacturer to not advertise a product below a certain price. Sometimes a gift with purchase can be a way. You're not changing the price at all. You're adding to the value of the product. That can sometimes be an acceptable way that a manufacturer will allow you to assist in the value of it's because that's more of a value add as opposed to a price detractor. Now we're getting into like branding and economics and perception, all this kind of stuff. Manufacturers don't want their prices to be all over the place, everybody to just be racing to the bottom. Then no one perceives that their product is worth anything, and it hurts the manufacturer as a whole. So my perspective as a retailer, yes, when you're shopping, you're like, I want the lowest price possible. Give it to me now. That's great in the short term, but at the same time, you want to make sure that your manufacturer is actually making a healthy profit so that they can continue to be in business, because it doesn't do any good for any manufacturer to go to the lowest price possible, not have any money left, and then they go out of business, and then you don't have that brand at all anymore. And if that happens across the whole industry, fountain pens disappear. That's not good. We don't really want that to happen, any of us. So you got to have a healthy profit margin in there. Profit is not a bad thing, especially in a business like ours that is, a niche thing. There's no government protection. There's no subsidies of any kind. They're fountain pens. They're hobbyist things. They're things that people enjoy. So if we want them to be around, you got to have some profit in there. So again, we have to be methodical about that as a retailer when that makes sense. One way that does make sense is if we have slow moving inventory, we want to assist it. So we will take that hit and do it. Other times that can happen at the manufacturer level. They may have something that's really slow. And they say, hey, we've got, they may have a certain amount of budget, or they may strategically just say, we're willing to give you a certain product or a certain thing of ink. And again, this may happen across all retailers. It could be a promotional thing that they do. We want to increase the awareness. We want to increase the volume of certain things that move. So we are going to give everyone who buys X dollar amounts of inventory over the next 6 months, this ink or this whatever things to go with it. So it can happen at the manufacturer level to incentivize retailers who then can pass it on to you as a customer. It can just happen at the retailer level. It can happen a lot of different ways, but that's generally what's happening. Is there's some sort of assistance, some sort of a helping along that we're trying to do with certain products, whatever the origin of that might be. Sometimes it could just be a promotional thing. It could be a brand that is trying to bring extra awareness. Everybody gets excited when there's a deal, when there's a special extra something. So it might be that when a company is trying to make a splash with a new product and get more awareness out there, there might be a gift with purchase with that at the onset, or maybe at some point during the holidays or whatever, just so it can kind of break through the noise a little bit, have a little extra something to talk about, brings awareness to that product as a whole, and then there's more awareness of that product out there kind of in the fountain pen world in general. And that might help give some longevity, give some legs to that individual pen model, that brand, whatever it might be. So it could be kind of almost a loss leader from a marketing standpoint, and manufacturers may budget for that kind of thing. As a certain level, we know if we're going to launch a new pen, that we're going to have X amount of dollars that we might assist, in the launching of such a thing. Not everyone is that methodical about that or takes that approach or is that, coordinated with it. But certainly that is a thing that happens in e-commerce in general. Every now and then there's something that happens as a mistake. It's like a misorder or a double order. We just end up with more inventory than we ever even planned. And it might just be like, okay, when we talk to the manufacturer and they're like, we don't want that back. Especially if it's like our fault. You get into like personal relations negotiation. It's like if they think that they can do something with it, sell it. But if they're like, no, y'all ordered, 100,000 of those, that's an exaggeration. But then we're like, shoot, what are we going to do with this? Again, you get back into the situation of this stuff's going to sit on the shelf for years, or let's just drop the price, get it out there. And then, a bunch of people will be excited. If we can just cover our overhead, if we can just not lose money, we'll do that. So you can throw extra things in there and kind of make that happen. Let's see here. Other things that we might do here at Goulet, we might do this to help incentivize you all. We might, again, be willing to take a margin hit on some products by doing free things or running a sale or something like that during some of our slower times. Obviously, like the holidays are a busier time for us. The summer tends to be a little bit slower for us. Us from a cultural standpoint, we like to have really kind of regular work for all of our team. We don't want them to be sitting around doing nothing in the summertime because then they start to wonder if the company's healthy or are they going to get laid off, this type of thing. We really don't want people to be that concerned. We just from a culture standpoint like to have members of our team feel very safe and secure about that. I know other e-commerce, other retailers where their business swings wildly throughout the year. There's one company that I know, a friend of mine, who he makes 60% of his annual revenue, 60% of it in 17 days around Christmas time. 17 days, 60% of the business. Boy, you want to talk about some stress. How in the world do you run a business like that? You got to have temporary help and all that kind of stuff around the holidays. And that can happen a lot in certain industries. I'm thankful that we are a little less seasonal than that. But even still, there's some ups and downs that we got to ride out throughout the year. So we'll do things like we manufacture some of our own stuff. We make, things like pen flush and brass sheets and all that. We will like kind of save up a lot of that for maybe the summertime, when we're a little bit slower or like into the early fall. And then we can have our team kind of making that stuff. And then we are well stocked going into the holidays, that kind of thing. So like we'll try to ride that out, smooth it out. But as we're slower, maybe in the summertime, we can again sell certain things. Maybe we're not making a lot of money on a given product, but it helps keep our team busy. Morale is up. We're still moving things through, and it's just good from a business standpoint and healthy, and keeps our team happy, which again is good for you. You get some cheaper products. We're not as flush with cash out of the situation, but we aren't turning over our staff as much or having to fight morale challenges and stuff like that. So all this to say, like, there's a lot of reasons that there could be some of this stuff, and these are some of the big ones that we use. We've never specifically taken the approach of let's try and hoodwink people. Let's build in some free stuff, but it's not really free because we're making them buy extra and it's going to be covered. We really try not to take that approach. We try to be fair and honest and all that. Like, honesty is one of our core values. We'll definitely have things we not always we can't always divulge exactly what our margins are, and we don't get into that kind of stuff. That's privileged information. But for sure, just know that whenever we do a type of promotion, we're very methodical about what it is. It could be for a variety of reasons, and honestly sometimes the reasons can overlap, and there could be a couple different things. They'd all get mixed into a pot, and we're like, okay, let's do this. It'll help kind of fix multiple things at once. specifically like during the holidays, during times of low volume. It's like, well, we're overstocked on this. We need to keep our team busy. Let's really put some jet fuel to move these products out the door. Our team will be busier. We'll clear up some inventory. Customers get a good deal. It's kind of a win for everybody. We recoup that cash and we can move on to buy some other things. If it was an exact science, we would never have any of these issues. But as you know, it's retail and it's people, and preferences change, and different things go on. It's extremely complicated, but that's some of the reasons why some of these things might go on. All right, Hercule Poirot on YouTube. Sorry if I botched your name. If you carry a pen company, do you require a constant supply of products? For example, if you wanted to carry a small new brand that couldn't carry out a continuous supply but released batches or whatnot, would you still carry them? And if a company who you only carry special editions of, like Pelikan, if all these releases are uber popular, how would you handle a complete lack of stock for a company? Well, we don't require anything. You know what I mean? Like we're not dictating anything that our manufacturers or suppliers should do. We are kind of beholden to them and what they are able to produce. Stock supply is definitely one of our biggest challenges that we have being in a niche industry like we are. The fountain pen industry is really small. To actually make a pen, it is rather complicated. The engineering behind it, all the different components, all the different supplies and different things that have to go into it. Every manufacturer that I talk to, they're like, yeah, people would be amazed to know just how complicated it is to make something so small that we, essentially for, whatever reason, we can kind of take for granted how complicated it is to make. But it is rather complicated. That's why pretty much every release is delayed or gets shorted constantly. It's actually far more the norm what you're asking about. I'm like, oh, it doesn't have a constant supply of products. Yep, small new brand, not continuous supply, only special editions. Sometimes they dry up. That's literally like all the time. That is this business. That is this industry. And I talk to other e-commerce owners who don't have to deal with this at all. Like there's one guy I know who is an awards, he does custom awards and trophies and stuff like that. He says literally any of his products that he needs to order, he orders it, and as much as he wants is on his doorstep the next day. Literally anything. He has zero stock issues. The challenge he has is he has a lot of competitors who are very well stocked and they can get their stuff custom done and shipped out immediately. So he's dealing with a whole host of other issues. Inventory, not a problem for him. At all. Literally at all. He doesn't have to do any forecasting, doesn't have to really do anything. It's just if he needs something, he orders it, it's there the next day. No problem. So every business is very, very different. With us, we have found, through talking to many, many, many other businesses, this is much more of a challenge for us and our industry than in many other industries. The whole thing I think it's just because, again, it's not a commodity product, it's kind of a discretionary industry. A lot of the manufacturers, extremely complicated, lots of dependencies on different parts and supplies and materials from all over the place. You're dealing with a lot of international, so you get customs delays and duties and changes of tariffs and all this other stuff. Environmental regulations that can be different in all different parts of the world. It gets rather complex. But yeah, so this is literally just like every day for us. Most of what we deal with is small batches with irregular supply. That's more the norm than the exception. But we'll still carry them for sure, because we do currently. That's most of everything that we carry. We deal with some super small companies like Organic Studio, Noodlers, believe it or not, is incredibly small. It's pretty much Nathan Tardif. He has one distributor, which is just a handful of people, but I mean, it's less than 10 people in the entire distribution chain. Herbert, Edison, these are all like single-digit employee companies. So there's not an infinite supply of every single product that they ever offer. It's rather irregular. So if they make a good product, we can get enough of it to kind of cover our overhead of launching a product, and we get a regular enough supply, then great, we'll carry that, and that's why you see stock outages sometimes. Pretty regular stock outages with certain brands is because they're doing their best and you're seeing their best, and if it happens to do really well for us too, we will often tap out the supply. Going to your thing about, and we'll do that, we can come out ahead and not frustrate everybody as long as there's good communication. It's where we get into trouble with smaller suppliers, is where they're having challenges. They're like just completely overwhelmed. They, are either new to the business, or they've grown so fast that they can't handle it, or, there's a run on a certain type of thing and they haven't figured out yet the supply chain. They just don't know. They don't have answers to any of our questions. Stuff gets delayed for months and months, and it just goes on, and it just gets to the point where we are sick of answering, the same questions of when are you going to get this, when are you get that, and we have no answer. And if we aren't getting a supply of any product, it's better to just drop the product than it is to continue just saying that we can offer it but not actually offering it. You know what I mean? So it's not always that we have to be in that situation, but it's for sure it happens like pretty much on the regular. So we do have to deal with that. So let's see here. We have plenty of other companies. You mentioned Pelikan that have special editions that are pretty much everything for us. If they don't have special editions, well, then there's really not much going on, and that happens on the regular. Pelikan, for example, you notice we don't carry any of their regular editions. We've tried them. They just fall flat. There's a lot of competition internationally for those. The pricing is all out of whack across the world. So even when we've offered them, we have map pricing and stuff like that, which is way higher than some of the international. This happens with some, I'm just not trying to pick on Pelikan. I love Pelikan. But this is a challenge that I'm not ignorant to with several key brands. So we end up in that kind of situation. So it's like, I don't really get all up in arms about it. It's reality. It is what it is. It's a global marketplace, and I'm not going to go crying in my own milk. So is that a phrase? Crying in your cereal? I don't know. Whatever. I'm not crying in my anything. It just is what it is. So it's just math, and part of the reason why we diversify, we have a number of different brands. Obviously, we want to offer things to the fountain pen world. I'm putting on almost a different hat here. This is a businessman hat. And so when I put that on, okay, if I'm completely dependent on, a manufacturer that can't provide a regular supply, is very small, very speculative, if something happened to them, they trip over their own feet and end up in the hospital and they can't supply anything, do I have to lay people off? That's no good. Do I have nothing to sell? That's no good. So we diversify, so we have a number of different brands, because craziness like that happens constantly behind the scenes. Y'all have no idea. Just no idea. You have some idea because I've just told you. But really you have no idea the detail of how crazy the supply chain gets in this industry. It's a huge effort that we do to try to keep things level. The phrase that I use around here with my team all the time is we are like a duck or a swan, or however graceful you want to be, that's gliding across the water. To you all, it looks like, or the way it should work, is it looks like we're just gliding gracefully across the water. But if you look under the water, the feet are going like this, and you're like, ugh! So that's pretty much how it feels for us here. We want to be to you this smooth, graceful bird that's just gliding across a beautiful pond, and underneath we are just churning, trying to make things happen and trying to make it look good on top. So there you go. So we diversify. If anything crazy is happening with one brand or the other, we're going to get pops of really things, y'all see there's a lot of products across a lot of different brands that launch every single year. It gets really exciting. And the way that I think about it, if you think about, going back to like economic stuff, I'm feeling very, very economical in today's Q&A. If you're familiar with a dollar cost averaging strategy, like if you're investing in the stock market, essentially what you say is if the stock market is probably the biggest, most prominent example of how crazy and how fickle people can be in a business setting, so in just the marketplace in general. So it's up and down and all over the place. If you try and invest individually in any one stock, almost no one can do it consistently over time and beat the trend of the general marketplace. I would say that's probably pretty similar to most any retail business. So for us, what we try to do is we try to diversify the brands that we offer, the type of products that we sell. That's why sometimes we'll pick up things and we're like, I really don't know that this is going to sell well, but we just got to try it to test and see and maybe diversify a little bit. And sometimes we're surprised. A lot of times we're like, yep, that fell flat. I thought it would and it did. Sometimes we're like, oh, I thought it was going to fall flat and it actually did okay. So, it all gets kind of blended in there. But for us, it's like if we're carrying a regular supply of new products that's kind of spread out across brands, across interests, across price points, all that kind of stuff, then for us as a company as a whole, we'll have generally a more smoothed out trend than just like, this month is great, next month is terrible. It's when you have those sharp swings that just can wreck your psyche. So we've diversified a bit so that we can be a little more consistent. We can think a little more long term, build towards that, and that largely has worked out, pretty well for us so far over the last 10 years. Last question I have for you this week. Man, I'm in crazy overtime. Oh well. Thank you for your time. Connor Adlam on YouTube says, I've noticed that over the years, brands have come and gone with some level of regularity on Goulet pens. Do you find that once you carry a new brand, interested customers buy and then sales slow, as everyone who wanted a product got it? Once a customer buys a pen, it's unlikely that they would want another identical pen, not always the case. So does that factor into your decisions to add and drop brands over the years? Sure, like that can definitely happen. It depends. This is a very nuanced question. It's not across the board. This is kind of building upon the previous question maybe a little bit. Obviously, new stuff is interesting. There's definitely like what we call the launch curve. Whenever we launch something new, there's much more interest on it, and then it kind of has a long tail of interest. However popular a product is, sometimes that curve stays a little higher, but there's almost always a curve that comes after a new product launch. I think that's probably with all businesses everywhere. There's some products that, the staples that are out there, right? The Lamy 2000 has been around for, 54 years, right? So that one, pretty steady. There's not a lot launching, so we're riding the long tail on that one because it's a really stable, really well-known, really respected pen. Pilot Vanishing Point, all that kind of stuff. What's interesting is when you have, to compare like a Lamy 2000 and Pilot Vanishing Point, there might be new colors or a new thing that's happening on the same model of pen. That new color may have its own kind of little launch curve, but in general, the model as a whole may have, a little more flatness to it. So it really varies a little bit. I'm thinking like some of the staples that, just have universal appeal. Lamy 2000, Pilot Vanishing Point, Pilot Custom 823, Visconti Homo Sapiens, All-Star, Safari, Eco, 580, Metropolitan. These are all like mainstays in the community. They're going to maintain generally a sustained level of demand beyond the initial launch. So it's going to vary a little bit depending on things. But at the same time, depending on the color, depending on if everybody's already got, several different versions of the same thing, and you're like, this is a slightly different version, I'll pass on this one, that can vary quite a bit. So when we're looking to launch whole new brands, we're always hoping for a long-term relationship, We'll often hold off actually launching with a new brand until we feel that both they and we are ready to really do it right. I can't tell you, I've had some brands we've been talking to for years, literally years plural, before we launch them, because either they're not ready, we're not ready, the market's not ready, whatever it might be. Kind of the stars have to align before we look to enter into a whole new brand relationship, because it's so much work to do a new brand. It's a lot of awareness, a lot of marketing, a lot of time invested. Our team has to experience it all. So there has to be, a payback of a certain amount of sales volume that we get to pay back all that initial kind of upfront investment and customer service, stuff with that. So, as long as we can cover that initially, then, we're hoping for the best after that. But really, when we launch something new, we're hoping for really like a 9 month to a year, like pretty successful period with that. After that, you're kind of over the initial hump, and the company needs to have kind of its own momentum. You need to be working with them, and you need to see new things coming from them, or it needs to get some legs on its own. It's very difficult for a new brand to do that, quite honestly. So at the end of the day, if it's an amazing product and it's fairly priced, whatever that price may be, it has good availability, people can actually get it, and it differentiates itself in some way in the community, then we're likely not going to drop it because we'll sell it well enough to keep it going. If it's something really novel, but it's not universally appealing, it's kind of a fad, maybe it might face a lot of hurdles, uphill battles with like consistency or quality or other factors, that's where it gets really, really tough. There might be a really unique idea, but it's just too cumbersome to do. Or there's a really unique idea, but in order to produce it, because it's a novel idea, in order to produce it at scale, it costs such a tremendous amount that it just prices itself out of what people are willing to pay. We see that happen sometimes. So you never really know. We hope for certain things. But that might be why you see certain things come and go. And then also just as we've been around for 10 plus years now, a lot of the earlier brands that we were carrying, they were new, just as a company, we were new and there was growth and all that kind of stuff. as we're maturing, the brands that we've been carrying have been maturing a little bit, unless those companies are keeping themselves interesting or coming out with new products. They themselves might just kind of naturally kind of age out, and maybe we have certain types of products, like I'm thinking like a lot of paper products specifically. They really haven't changed much. Paper in general, it's heavy to ship. There's a lot of challenges with paper, and there's a lot of competition in that space too, from like Kickstarters and other suppliers who focus more individually on that. So paper for us in general has not kept up with the growth of our company as a whole. So if we're looking to carry a new paper supplier, it's like, we'll try it, but the odds, like the numbers are stacked against a new paper company. That's why you don't see quite as many new ones. It's a ton of work, ton of photography. How do you really make it look different? How do you differentiate it? It's very, very, very challenging to do that. So for that reason, we carry new things and then they might disappear. So that definitely happens. And just because we've been around for more years, we have more brands that we've either been working with for a while that might age themselves out, or we carry a lot of the big brands already, and most of the new brands that we have to acquire, at this point, not acquire in terms of owning them, but acquire their product line. Most of those new brands now are more speculative. They're newer, they're smaller, they're a little riskier than some of the mainstays in the community, and we have to kind of just gamble a little bit and just roll the dice. So now it's just the risks are higher with some of these smaller, newer brands that we're carrying. And we always want to support the makers. Like, we started out in our garage, and we bootstrapped everything. Like, my heart is there, but at the same time, I also have the burden of knowledge of knowing how difficult it is to overcome all that. So every now and then we'll come across a brand and I'm like, this looks appealing. There are definitely customers asking for it. I know that they're not charging enough money for that product. If they want to really sell that at scale, they're going to have to grow. They're going to have to hire people. They're going to have to get a rented space and not have it in their house. They're going to have to do this. If they're not charging a certain price for this product, they're not going to be a healthy company. We're not going to be able to work with them long term. And if they raise that to the price, a lot of the novelty is all of a sudden gone. I see this happen with a lot of startups and a lot of ones that are really interesting, especially, ones that are really, really, really value priced and you're buying direct from them. If we as a retailer started to carry them, the price would have to go up, of course, because there's just more involved. When you're scaling up, every business, you just can't keep the same razor thin margins when you're a startup as you do when you grow, because the reliability needs to be there. And so that is a challenge. It's something that we have to kind of always be on the lookout for. And we've had it time and time again where we've kind of, speculated and gotten involved with a certain brand, not to name any one specific one, but we've had some, and then just because of a variety of things, it's like, we'll work with a brand. We're like, hey, here's these challenges. We see them coming down the road. Yeah, okay. We get there, those challenges come up, and then all of a sudden we hear, oh, I can't do this. We got to we got to do this, that, and the other. Can you take a margin? And I'm like, look, we knew this was coming. This is going to happen, and here we are, and then it doesn't make sense anymore, and then we part ways. That happens, fairly regularly, but, for me, business it's all people. Like, it's all working with people. We're always gracious. We always try to educate, and we're knowledgeable. You would be probably surprised at the amount of time that I spend personally talking to people whose products we're not selling, because we're either like working with them, trying to build relationships, trying to get, startup people to really get us. My heart's there. We spend a pretty fair amount of time doing that type of stuff to cultivate long-term relationships for growth. It's not just, I go to a trade show and I just pick all these different brands off a shelf. That's not really how this industry works. So it's a lot more work. It's more like farming than hunting. And that's just kind of where we're at. So there you go. Nice long Q&A for you. I hope you enjoyed that. My question of the week for you is, have you ever purchased a discontinued ink, or at least maybe stocked up on an ink because you knew that it was going to be discontinued? I'm curious to know what you value so much that you would really go out of your way and seek it out, specifically on the ink front. So there you go. Hope you have a great weekend, great rest of your week. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching this nice extended Q&A, and right on.